And so it's easy when the sociology is obvious in the question of science to see some of these things. But when we get to the level of, we have this, going back to your idea of genetic determinism, we have this idea of this Lego set of information that's sort of carved in stone, which in itself ignores our evolutionary obsession. But that, there's no sociology when it comes to, I did this thing with the DNA and it produced this result. So could you speak a little bit about how that sort of the sociological context shapes or frames how we see what's happening in the plant world or at the level of seed that results in the kind of science that we're doing as opposed to more systems-based approaches?
Well, there's a nice story about SRI rice. Do you know that story?
No, go ahead.
I mean, the thing that your question brings to mind is that, so we basically have an agricultural system in which all the research is about genes and pesticides and fertilizers, and all the other stuff gets left out. And there are farmers who can't afford any of those things. And in the 1980s, there were farmers in Madagascar who couldn't afford any of those things, so they developed a new system of growing rice, which is a staple crop. So, and they called it the system of rice intensification. And this basically was, what they were doing was developing the potential of individual rice plants. And they were doing it by transplanting them very early in their lives. They don't flood the rice, so they save water. They plant very few seeds, so they give each plant a lot of space, so they save money on seeds. They use no chemicals and no fertilizers normally. Occasionally they do use chemicals, but this is 25 years later or whatever, the modern iteration of that system. But basically what they've done is generate a system which now of growing rice, which now breaks the world, they have the world record for the amount of rice grown on an acre of land. And that's been certified and repeated and is unquestionably the case. So without using any chemicals or special seeds or fertilizers, they are breaking all the records of the industrial agriculture or the most specialist research institutions and their supposed experts. Now, they basically, that rice system as of today is used by something like 25 million rice farmers around the world. And they have basically done that in spite of the hostility of the scientific rice research community. They've had to basically work their way around those scientists. And in order to spread the idea, the small group of people and the hand-to-hand, farmer-to-farmer contacts that have gone on to allow that system to grow from the world's most obscure country, pretty much, in Madagascar, to 25 million people around the world, farmers around the world, has the basic reason for its success is because it's a really, really good system for people who are caught in a poverty trap and don't have access to seeds, water, or fertilizers or chemicals. And even if they did, they would probably bankrupt themselves if they bought those things. So farmers know what works for them, usually, and so they're using this system and spreading it around the world. But it's been behind the backs of the chemical companies, agribusiness, and the scientific community, which is basically in denial of what they've achieved. So the scientific community has actually even published papers saying that the yields achieved by these rice farmers, peasant rice farmers, is impossible because it's too high. Okay? They've actually published papers saying that. And but these papers are in denial of actual facts, right? And but think of the sociological issues going on in that situation, that an innovation in farming that is incredibly successful and popular with farmers has to be done in the face of scientific hostility.
Yeah, so, as a naive person, I think to myself, why wouldn't the International Rice Institute look at that and go, wow, that's amazing, how do we replicate that? There's just an inability to accept that anything other than F1 chemical-heavy approaches can produce yield.
I think there's more, it more comes down to conflicts of interest.
Yeah.
Right? It puts them out of a job. Right? It's done, whereas they are asking for millions of dollars to have a 1% increase in yield, or promising that, 20 years down the line, with $100 million, they'll have this thing they like to call C4 rice, which is basically a whole different metabolism of rice that will probably increase its productivity by 30%. These farmers have done it with no money whatsoever, and got increases in yield of 3, 4, and 5-fold sometimes. So hundreds of percent, 300% versus the 30%.
And so by focusing, and here's the difference that you're pointing out is, on one end, you're focusing on the genetic determinism of the seed and chemical combination. On the other side, what you did is you had someone look at the whole system of husbandry, where they're raising a baby from embryonic stage up through childhood to maturity to reproductive stage in the producing seed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the only difference between the two is that one group of farmers looked at, how do I work with the entire system that I have available? So they renegotiated the hydrogeological cycle.
Yeah.
They rethought the plant neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
They rethought what had to happen with the soil to make sure there was the right soil nutrients to provide the maximum seed, and each plant was cared for, so it required a certain kind of scale that I'm assuming that most of these paddies are no more than an acre.
Oh yeah, most
like a half an acre, a quarter acre, because each plant, like a house plant's getting some love and attention.
Yeah.
And when you do even multiple acres, before we get to tens, let alone hundreds or thousands of acres, just multiple acres, that kind of care and attention becomes impossible. And so there's a deeper piece around the economic system, or we create it like it's an ecological imperative that we have to produce, on scale, as opposed to nutrient per acre, as an example.
I mean, many of the arguments that the rice scientists make against this system are, for example, things like, it's more labor intensive, and that, they're kind of sociological, economic arguments like that. And but it turns out that it's not more labor intensive. I mean, the farmers wouldn't be doing it if they couldn't do it, right? And the basic issue is that when you do traditional rice farming, you're actually damaging the rice plants a lot. By growing them so incredibly close together, you're limiting those plants. Whereas what these farmers are doing are allowing these plants to have their space. They're not even so much tending them. They're just avoiding the abuses that normal rice growing subjects them to. But also it means that you can, if you want to grow, whereas a conventional rice farmer will grow 3 tons on their acre. If they made it, they'll have they'll imagine their farm is as big as 1 acre. They'll grow 3 tons on their 1 acre. But if you can grow 22 tons on 1 acre, you can basically shrink the area of rice you grow to 1/10, and then grow
other
peanuts and eggplants and whatever you want on the rest of it, right? Have trees or whatever you want. Yeah. And so that's part of the reason why it works for farmers, is that the narrow perspective of this is all about improving the rice crop is transcended by these farmers, because they're improving their bananas and their eggplants and their tomatoes.
Their farm.
Right? Their entire farm they're improving.
Yeah.
Yeah.